Hi, folks, and welcome to our Sacred Herbalism workshop. Today, we're diving into how to use common plants to create ceremony, access higher consciousness, clear negative energy, and manifest what you want in this life. We'll be taken on this journey by Brittany Wood Nickerson, who is an incredible human being, wise woman, and herbalist who we've met. We met Brittany while we were filming our new Herbalism docuseries, which is going to be amazing. We're going to be launching that this summer. Stay tuned for that. But along the way, you meet amazing people, and Brittany's one of them. Who is Brittany? Brittany is an herbalist, author, health educator, and cook. She combines knowledge of nutrition and a passion for using food as medicine with her training in Western, Ayurvedic, and Chinese herbal medicine. Her treatment and coaching approach emphasize personal empowerment, preventative healthcare, and whole body wellness. She is the founder and primary instructor of Time Herbal, where she teaches the 3-year herbal apprenticeship program, as well as courses in herbal cooking and homesteading. You can learn more about her work and programs at www.tymeherbal.com. So www.timeherbal.com. I think that you're going to fall in love with her stuff, and you're going to fall in love with her right now because we're about to talk to her. How are you doing, Brittany?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Where are you coming at us from? I know where you're coming at us from, but tell these guys where you're coming at us from.
Yeah, so I'm here in Western Massachusetts, where we've been blessed with our second March snowstorm in a week. So it's still sort of covered in a blanket of white here, and I'm cozy by my wood stove, which you can see in the background. Here in the Time Herbal teaching space. So we're going to be kind of talking about a lot of plants and we'll talk about how they're growing, and you can imagine me being here with them hibernating. But depending on where folks are, they might have access to these plants growing fresh right now. So there's a good contrast there.
Very, very cool. I can't tell you how excited I am to be talking about sacred herbalism. I don't know it from more of like Americana type herbalism perspective. It's more from my perspective is more from like the Andes and the Amazon, and I'm sure a lot of the practices share similarities, but we've seen some really amazing approaches to clearing space, creating protection, and just kind of welcoming in and sending off blessings in a more effective way, which I think is a really potent and awesome thing to learn how to do.
Great. And I'll just say briefly for folks that aren't familiar, my background is in Western herbs, as you mentioned, also Ayurveda and Chinese medicine. So I'm bringing in a lot of different perspectives and experiences over the years, but I mostly focus on using bioregionally available herbs. So herbs that I have in my bioregion that many people likely on this call will also have access to. And so we'll talk about sort of like a wide range of applying them that spans many different traditions, but we'll be focusing on these herbs that we have local access to.
So are we talking about herbs that you would grow in your garden? Are we talking about herbs you would forage? Or are you talking about maybe in between herbs that just tend to spring up around you that maybe people would consider to be weeds, but actually are highly medicinal?
Yeah, both. So I've picked out a couple of plants that some evergreens, that I just picked before the call. And then I also have some plants that are not native to my area, but that I can grow as annuals. And then some others that are more native to the European continent that are now naturalized or easy to grow and cultivate in the garden. So we'll talk about the whole range.
Okay, before we get started, I have one question for you. It's maybe kind of an obvious question to you, but it isn't obvious to me. How did you get started on this path? I mean, you grew up in the States, probably a similar type environment that I grew up in. I grew up in New England. I'm not sure if you grew up in Massachusetts, but I mean, this was something that definitely wasn't taught to me in elementary school. So how did you find yourself on this path?
Yeah. So I am from Western Massachusetts. I grew up about 35 minutes from where I live now in a small town. And I was really blessed to be in a community of folks that were sort of alternative minded, maybe like some kind of, my parents were like slightly younger than hippies. But they definitely had that sort of very earth conscious, natural mindset, and really wanting to engage in, you could call it a lot of different things, but I would call it an intentional lifestyle. And they were interested in, like eating healthy, but also just the lifestyle that came with that. So gardening, we heated with wood. I spent hours every winter in the back of my dad's pickup truck while he like cut and split cordwood. And just kind of that life close to the earth. And so in my community, there was a woman, her name's Jean Bergstrom, and she's a practitioner of plant spirit medicine. And she's still like one of my mentors and just a dear friend. And she had a son my brother's age, and they were best friends. And so I would see her at soccer practices and picking up my brother at her house after school and various things. And she was an herbalist, and she was the one that really kind of opened the door for me into this world. From a very young age, I think I was probably only 8 when I went to her house and she offered me a dandelion flower muffin. And I lost it. I was like, this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me. So she really was a huge gateway. And then I think my mom really understood that I always really loved to like make things with my hands and do crafts, and was always into herbs and stuff in the small way that we had integrated into our life in my childhood. And she eventually signed me up to take a class with Jean, this wise woman mentor of mine. And that was kind of the beginning of learning. It was a simple class. We learned how to make dream pillows and lip balms and herbal teas, but that really kind of got me going. So then when I was in college, I moved cross country and went to UC Berkeley and found myself in ethnobotany class. That was also really wonderful. And eventually I just found a program, not actually at the university, but sort of outside of the university. And I started taking that my senior year in college, and I knew that was what I was going to, like, that was what I was supposed to do. That was my work, so to speak. And it's evolved over the years, starting from like very kind of that hands-on application of herbal medicine and teaching people how to use herbs for home use and personal development. And all the way now I train people to be clinical practicing herbalists. And I'm kind of feeling my work start to shift a little bit too, a little bit more towards earth-based spirituality and ritual. And so I'm offering some new programs this year that are kind of geared towards that are following the path of my own learning and evolution, but also what I feel that my students and the culture are hungry for. So that's very exciting. And I think just to address your question or your thought about, growing up here in the States, I think that because we have such a disjointed relationship, because the culture doesn't necessarily still hold a lot of continuity in terms of how we practice these arts, they are inevitably influenced by a lot of systems. And so I definitely try to be very mindful of acknowledging the input and the gifts that all those different systems have kind of offered me over the years. And just the fact that there's like a lot of, there's messy boundaries, it's not just that I'm teaching or experiencing or living in my life one tradition or one way of practicing herbalism, that it's very multifaceted. And so I want folks to know that as you're listening, to be able to kind of see that this is an art form that has developed personally for me under the influence of many different, very wise systems.
Very cool. That reminded me of something that I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel Vitalis. He's a friend of ours. He runs a company called Surf Rival, and he's just one of the early sort of foraging voices in foraging that kind of came out 20 years ago. But he talks about this idea of romanticizing native tradition and romanticize, the problem with overly romanticizing, indigenous culture, when what he's trying to do instead is, he calls it the modern savage. He's like, we've turned into like the modern native people, like, where it's like, at some point you have to start actually identifying with the land that you live on and not identify with like, oh, I'm Italian. I'm not really, like, it's like 7 generations ago. So it's like, when you start actually identifying with the land that you're on, and instead of saying, well, there were people that were here at one point that actually were from here, when do you start actually embracing the land you're on? And also, I don't know, just start putting together your own protocol and having that just be what you natively are. Obviously your body and your physiology takes some time to kind of catch up with your environment, but what you're talking about in terms of drawing upon various traditions and also the stuff that's right under your nose, and maybe even some modern medicine, and maybe even like, the idea that we do live in a technologically kind of saturated environment. And maybe that's just something that is not to be resisted, but just to be incorporated into all of these things, as opposed to like being like, that's over there, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to be the natural guy who like only does that. Like the idea, Daniel's whole theory that I think is interesting is just the idea of putting together this protocol for yourself and having that just become what you would identify as, not as like this one thing because you're from a certain place, genetically speaking, but as like just owning where you are right now and everything that's around you, and figuring out a way to sort of incorporate that all and have that all complement one thing, or you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I actually think that's really a powerful message, because rather than living in the past or the future, we can live in our present moment. And part of why I buy regionally available herbs is because those are the plant spirits that are surrounding me and talking to me, and that are making their medicine available to me. One of my teachers, who I think you also interviewed for the docuseries, Pam Montgomery, she says that when she first started practicing herbalism, she would go to people's houses and she would see what plants are growing as weeds or just wild in their yard. And that's often gives us a huge insight into the kinds of medicine that we are needing. So I think that to be stuck in either just an ideal that is outside of our current state of being separates us from the world around us. And I think that a lot of what this work is about is reconnection, and that's one of the themes of what we're talking about today too, is just that idea of reconnection. Yet I do think it's incredibly important for us to acknowledge that a lot of these ancient systems are inevitably informing the way we practice today. And I really want to just always remember to be grateful to not only that lineage, but the ways that lineage has been oppressed over years, and that would be true of, many traditional healing systems, whether it's, in the United States or Native Americans, and then after that, the eclectics, or anywhere else in the world that you go, there's a lot of oppression. And so just kind of embracing that piece of the history alongside the wonderful healing gifts, and kind of reviving it in the spirit of the remembrance of all that history.
I agree 100%. It's very, to give a little sneak peek, like the first episode of our Herbalism docuseries really is about human rights, and like about, women's rights over the course of the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, and how all of these things are so intertwined with herbalism and just remedies. So we're all over it. I get it. Yeah. And I hope that what I said about my talents wasn't like sort of like me being like, just disregarding, those things at all. I would totally hold those traditions in high regard, and have much reverence.
I know you're on board with that. It's just wanting to share that with our audience and our listeners, so that people can really feel like the heart that's in my work, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could talk about this all day long, but we probably should be going into our curriculum here that we're going to be teaching. What are we doing today?
Yeah, so we're going to start our kind of overall theme. We're going to be using aromatic herbs, as that's kind of one of the themes. There's a couple themes. One of them is talking about different applications of these herbs, and they all happen to be aromatic. So I'm going to let that be a theme to tie through. And then we're going to talk just about the integration of really, really simple practices into our daily life, or it could be your weekly routines, what have you, to kind of make space in the physical body for our spirit to really be able to shine and be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. So we're going to talk about physical and energetic applications of these herbs, ranging from clearing the energy body and smudging to talking about drinking teas. So I thought we'd start with a tea meditation. And cool. I think you're ready for this, right?
Yes, I came with the tea. I came with tea ready.
Good. So the tea, I'm going to start by just pouring some hot water over my tea, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what this tea meditation means to me. And for those of you that are joining us, I chose a really simple herb, peppermint, which is a very common, easily accessible herb. I think you can get peppermint tea at almost any grocery store in America. And if you're joining us from overseas, you can probably find it somewhere as well, if not growing wild. And I'm just doing a simple loose leaf peppermint tea. I have 1 tablespoon of loose leaf peppermint in a tea ball here. And I poured hot water over it. If you have a tea bag, you would just use 1 tea bag, or if you had fresh peppermint leaves, you'd use about 2 tablespoons of chopped or torn peppermint leaves in about 8 ounces of hot water. So let me tell you a little bit about what this tea meditation means to me and why I practice this. So I've been teaching herbal medicine for 10 years now, and one of the things I feel really passionate about is helping to empower my students to have the tools and knowledge and information to learn about herbs, not just from what they hear or what they're told or what they read, but also through what they feel and what they experience, because I think those are the kinds of lessons that really stick with us in a deeper way. And it also builds empowerment, which is one of the cornerstones of my work. One of my visions for my work is that people become more empowered around their healthcare. So what the tea meditation helps us to do is strip away the knowing in the brain, in our kind of brain linear thinking sense of the word, and tap into the body in what we know through our visceral and physical experience. And so the tea meditation is actually, more than anything else, it's a practice of like learning and studying herbal medicine, but it's also a practice of non-judgment. Because especially when it's an herb like peppermint, that's quite common, that we know well, and probably, many people in the audience have probably had peppermint tea many times in their life. And if you're new to peppermint, fantastic. I'm very happy for you, because that'll make this even more powerful. When I do this with my students, I actually choose the most obscure herb I possibly can, because I think that, the less they know about it, the more powerful the ritual will be. So one of the inspirations for me with this exercise came from Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now. And he has this practice that he calls a flower meditation. And you sit with a flower and you just meditate on it. And he strongly encourages you to shy away from using words like beauty when you're describing the flower or meditating with it or talking about it. Because he says beauty carries with it judgment. We all have preconceived notions or ideas about what beauty means. But if we really just sit with the flower and we are like, wow, that rich purple color, those orange hues, whatever it is that we're looking at, then we can get so much more deep into understanding the power and the beauty and the offering of that flower. And so the tea meditation comes to me completely from that place. Like, let us strip away what we think we know about this practice of sipping tea, this herb called peppermint, and let us just step into our body, into the actual experience of the drinking of the tea. And so what I ask my students to do is just take a couple of quiet moments to think about and feel and experience what your senses are telling you about the plant. So the smell, the taste, the feel, both maybe the feel in your hands and the feel in your mouth. And it can be the sight, what you can observe. And just and maybe even hearing, if there's something you can hear. And I believe that everything matters. So even if you're hearing something that's not directly coming from your cup of tea, it may still be relevant to that meditative experience. So why don't we just take a quiet minute here, and I usually do it for about 5 or so minutes with my students and myself, but maybe we'll just do 30 or 60 seconds. And if folks are interested in doing this along with us, you can always pause, or actually we're live, so you can't pause, but you could pause later, or you can do this afterwards with any kind of herb that you're interested in. So should we just take a minute, Nick? Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, let's do it. It sounds great.
So I should have mentioned to folks that while you're doing the meditation, you can sip the, kind of actively engage with the tea by sipping or smelling and holding, or you can actually just kind of have it in your presence and kind of just be there with the experience. And for me, this is a loose leaf. I have little bits of it floating in my mouth. So I actually can taste both the texture of the water and the texture of the herb. So it is sort of a 5 sensory experience if you let it be. So did you notice anything, or what do you notice in the taste or the smell or the feel?
It's really, really hard not to put on the labels that I know I'm supposed to say about this tea. I want to say that first. Like I want to be like, oh, it smells refreshing,
right?
And it has all kinds of meaning for me because, and this is probably going to pollute the experiment, because I spent a lot of time in Morocco, and mint tea is just like ate benana is what they call it. And it's like it's usually you have it with like so much sugar in it that the spoon almost stands straight up. That's kind of the way they make it there. But I mean, it's like everybody drinks. That's what they drink in the morning. They drink mint tea, and it's gorgeous. Like they actually almost they use a clear glass so you can see the freshness and the greenness of the mint you're drinking, which is really cool. But anyway, this isn't. But this is still
medicine. What we see in that beauty, like you said, it's beautiful. That's part of the medicine. I think that beauty is huge medicine, very overlooked, and yet very important, very huge. So, and I'm glad you acknowledge that it's hard not to put your preconceived labels on it, because I think we all come up against that, right? And I think that especially when we start out this exercise, it is okay to use words like "it smells minty" or "it smells like," and then to dive into deeper to what are those associations and what is that experience for you.
Like the next thing I could say that's probably the cousin to minty and fresh is it does feel very cooling to me. When I have it in my tongue, it feels cooling. It's still kind of freshy, sounding when I say cooling, but it is a little bit more specific. Like it does feel like in my body, if I drink this in my tongue and on the roof of my mouth and even in the back of my throat right now, it feels like it's like making every breath I take a little bit cooler, So.
Wonderful. And I think that counts as both, you might have it connected with refreshing and cool, but you're going deeper. You're saying, okay, minty, okay, fresh, and then you move deeper into cooling, right? And for you, cooling might be that kind of freshness that comes with peppermint.
And what I would say is if I was going to apply some kind of a chromatic scale to this thing, and there was it would definitely be a darker color, not a lighter color. I don't know why. It would be like darkness as opposed to lightness.
Yeah. Interesting. And so sort of in terms of yin or yang, would you place it on one spectrum or the other?
Yeah. Which one's so the dark? So the feminine is the darker.
Yeah, and that's more yin. It's associated with more, yin is more like moonlight, moontime energy. So yin can still be illuminated, but it would be under the presence of a kind of a darker, more subdued nature. And it would, nighttime, feminine. It means the shady side of the slope. And so what I love about your observation is that mint is a plant that often likes to have its feet wet. And I grow it in full sun in my field, but you can have mint, like I've seen mint growing by streams in complete shade on hiking trips before as well. So it is a plant that we see that a lot with plant signatures. We see it growing in an environment that possesses an energy that it then imparts upon the person when it's used or ingested. So, mint grows in a cool environment with wet feet, and it has a cooling effect on the body. And that's a very standard, simple association that can be made between those two things.
That's really cool. I love that idea, because there's herbs that I'm working with, and I have never done tea. I've never worked with them as a tea. I work with them as a tincture or as like an essential oil, but I don't ever, drinking them as a tea it seems like and this could be totally wrong, but in my like monkey brain, I feel like having using a tea extraction or infusion is probably one of the most ancient ways of using herbs, I'd imagine, besides just ingesting them.
It is.
You know what I mean? Because it's the most basic, but also it seems to be one of the more intimate ways of experiencing an herb.
I totally agree with you more. I think after direct medicine or that just simple eating of a plant, we have water-based medicines. And the other thing I'll point out about a water-based medicine in relationship or in contrast to a tincture, which I assume you're taking alcohol-based tinctures, but even glycerin or vinegar-based tinctures, is that water itself has a much more simple flavor and energetic than alcohol or glycerin or vinegar. And so when you have a tea of a plant, you're experiencing in a more pure form the actual flavor and energetics of the herb than you are with a tincture, because a tincture also carries the energetics of the alcohol, which is pungent and warm. So any herb that's taken in alcohol extract is going to be under the influence of the energetics of the alcohol, and it makes it much harder to have that deep sensory experience of just the plant itself. So that's not to discourage people from using that, but just to see the difference in terms of an exercise like this with using water.
That's really interesting. I want to get back to exactly what you're doing, but I popped into my brain that, like, you know, we look at like tea drinking as this like European English thing. We don't really do it a lot in the States unless you're having like a crazy English breakfast, black as possible, so it can compete with the coffee that you had the day before. But it almost feels like, it makes me wonder, like, if you go into like, to Far East Asia, same, like people, there's the tea is such a coveted thing. And it just makes me wonder if it's one of these traditions that have just been long lost, forgotten, and kind of along with it, like the idea of earth medicine. And, in the morning we drink coffee. I mean, coffee is a very like forceful, kind of a, there isn't anything subtle about coffee, in my opinion. It's very much like just in your face. You know what I mean? When you drink it, it's got like, it reaches right out for you, as opposed to like something like this where you need to kind of meet the herb halfway, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think, and going back to that conversation about yin and yang, coffee is very yang. And so coffee brings with it this sort of powerful, very bright, expansive, loud force that we then live under the influence of. And in our culture, we see a lot of health issues that are of a yang nature. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think, need to do for our health, and obviously every person is completely different, we all have different needs, but to tune into the yin energy. I think that yang, external, outward pushing energy, is really making us sick, both on a cultural scale and as individuals. And so, getting into that yang spirit the yin spirit. And what I love about this exercise is that even if you used a yang herb, you're still engaging through a yin pathway, because to sit in an intentional way with a cup of tea is very yin. The other thing you made me think of when you're talking about just the tea, is that tea is a way to share, and a way to create intimacy between people. And I have a sidebar in my recent cookbook, Recipes from the Herbalist Kitchen. There's a sidebar on the teapot and the importance and the power of the teapot. I have one right here. And, the medicine of the teapot is that we brew something that we share, and we drink it together out of the same pot. It's the same medicine as a soup pot on a table to share a meal together. And I think that tea, it offers us that, sit down to have a meeting, sit down to have a conversation, sit down as a family. Any way that you connect when you have tea, you are sharing that in an actual, not just through your verbal communication or your eye contact or whatnot, but also through this vessel of shared medicine and energy, right? So you're bringing the plant in with that, and you're also having a connection through that sharing of the teapot. So I would encourage folks to try tea meditation with any herb that they have access to. And again, it doesn't matter how exotic or not the herb is, and also anything that you ingest, really. I mean, consider a meditation for your coffee in the morning. Why not get to know your coffee in a more intimate way? It is a plant. So just as a way to really tune into the intention behind the beverage that you're drinking and the work with that particular plant. And just remember that everything that you notice does matter, that it's all of, you know, prime importance and can be applied to the medicine, or just the medicine of the experience of the drinking of the tea and the experience with that plant. So yeah, it's a good lesson for us to realize it doesn't have to be overly profound. Just be a cup of peppermint tea.
So good. It reminds me of a little bit of just the practice like of the dieta in the jungle, where a lot of this is done. I mean, almost all the medicine that you're given is given to you via teas. It's not like you're getting like, you know, Chancapiedra capsules in the jungle. You're drinking it. You know, it's passing your tongue, and you're.
Don't you think that that's more intimate?
Yeah, I think it's extremely intimate. You know, it's real. I mean, it involves every one of your senses. You know, and it's interesting how you can see as a patient, I mean, a participant, a human being who's ill, trying to work on themselves, they transform. Their relationship with the medicine they're taking transforms over the course of like a week or two when they start learning how every little bit of it. I mean, something about the taste is really interesting to me. And it almost feels like it's informative. It's more than just like, you know, the sentinel at the gate before you kind of like, you know, allow something into your stomach or your digestive tract, but it feels like there's information, almost like it's something that's more, you know, the taste of something could actually also be firing things on a neural, and you know, in your neural pathways to kind of be more receptive to something else that happens further down the line, as opposed to being just there for leisure or for survival's sake. I think that there's something about taste and smell that is more than that. I mean, and as we kind of dive deeper into herbal medicine and natural medicine in general, we're starting to realize a lot more about the things we take for granted and have kind of like written off as one thing when they're really like a variety of different things that have infinite complexity.
And it's incredibly complex, and I think that we understand a lot of it from the science brain place, and there's also a lot of it that we still don't maybe understand from that place, but have a like huge cultural heritage of engaging with. And we have these, you know, you're talking about taste and smell, and the olfactory senses in the nose go directly into our neurological pathways. That's how aromatherapy works. And then in our mouth, on our tongue, we have taste bud receptors that stimulate all parts of our body, most notably the enteric nervous system, which runs the length of the GI tract, and that has almost as many neurons as the brain and the spinal cord. So we're talking about a whole nother part of our, you know, it's often called the second brain. The gut and the GI tract is called the second brain because of that connection to this huge part of our autonomic nervous system. And so you're exactly right that it's creating pathways, and it's creating pathways on literally a holistic level through mind, body, spirit, completely interwoven with each other and inseparable, which I find really inspiring. And it's such in contrast to this, you know, this idea, the kind of separation that we experience so much in our healthcare system between like these different body systems and these different experiences in our life. And, you know, I mean, you know, from all your work and all your research that that's just not really how most people heal, and healing different than, you know, other forms of being made well.
I can't wait now to like I've got jars and jars of loose herbs, and I only use them when I have like the need for them. You know, I'm excited to start just like having them, making a morning tea of like just figuring out what nettle. What is like, you know, loose nettle tea would do for me over the course of like a 7-day period of just kind of like sitting with it and like just, you know, pouring more and more hot water over it and like just kind of experimenting with it. I love that idea of getting into plant intelligence.
Good. Yes. I think that would be so fascinating for you. I'm sure you would just love that. Yeah.
Well, and something that I think is inherent to all of this, and what we're learning again, like with the work we're doing right now with this herbalism documentary we're making, is like a lot of this seems to come back to, and I think a lot of the healing process comes back to attention to subtlety, to subtle things. Again, I don't think that in some ways something like nettle can reach out and grab you if you're like, you touch it the wrong way in nature. But I mean, if I'm drinking nettle tea, I might not sit there and be like, oh, it's clearly trying to communicate this one thing to me. It feels like a lot of it's subtle. And then as you kind of, you know, hone your hearing or hone your senses a little bit more, then those subtle energies become a lot louder. And I think that might be also be a practice that kind of comes along with tea drinking, is like you were sort of alluding to before. How do you sit with something and like really just quiet your mind and start understanding it, via direct communication, like direct transmission from what you're drinking to your psyche, kind of a thing.
And when you drop into your body in that way, you realize that really everything is subtle. Like, and we are so disconnected that we think that it takes these like large amounts of medicines or, impacts or herbs to make effects, but it's because we're living largely outside of our bodies. When we step back in our body, we realize how easily affected we are by subtle forms of medicine, by subtle ingestations of plants, by interactions with people, etc. But most of us are just sort of kind of immune to that, if you will. So I think that you're exactly right, that to just kind of be able to make that space to be in the presence of it opens up just this huge capacity for healing. And you touched on something else that has been a really big learning experience for me in my practice working with clients, which is that people almost always think that more is better. And I have now learned over the years to kind of communicate in advance with my clients in situations where, this is the subtleness that we're looking for, or more is not better in this situation. Because I've had experiences where clients have come back in and they've, I've recommended oil massage, for example, on their skin, and they tell me that their bed sheets smell rancid. And I'm like, that's because you're using too much oil. Actually, you just need a little bit of oil, right? Or they say, I've been drinking 4 quarts of nettle tea every day and I'm starting to get headaches. And I say, well, that's because you're drinking too much and it's a diuretic and you're now dehydrated, right? So that's sort of learned that valuable lesson of really helping people to understand that sometimes it is the subtleness that we're looking for, and giving them ideas of what they might look for to be able to perceive that subtleness without thinking that they're not getting what they're looking for. And also being clear with my clients about how much we're looking to use with it. So should we move on to our next section, our next topic of focus?
Yes. What do we have next?
Okay. So the next kind of theme or thing I wanted to focus on is using herbs to clear our energy body and also seal the energy body. So we think of our energy body as this kind of energetic force that's surrounding us. And there's lots of different ways that we can think about this from cultural traditions all around the world. From the perspective of just being a human in the world is how I want to start. Most of us have probably had the experience of meeting somebody and having a reaction that they have really good energy. Or maybe you've met somebody and been around somebody and said, their energy is really hard for me, or their energy gives me this particular kind of response. And you're interacting with the subtleties of energy in those moments. And some of us may be more or less aware of that, but all of us interact with energy on a daily basis. And so our energy body is largely what we present to the outside world. It's the space that we live in, and it's the kind of filter that things pass through as we're, being a human being in the world, whether we're in a personal space or whether we're in a public space or somewhere in between. And so what that energy does that energy body does is 2 things. One is that it creates a vibe through which we manifest our intentions, our self, our words, our actions, what have you. So it is a lens through which we distribute energy. And it's also a protective force that is the filter through which we receive energy. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that there's a reciprocity between those 2 things, and that it's somewhat inseparable. How we think about what we give and what we receive, that there's a real dynamic nature between the existence of those 2 things. Because a lot of us think that we can just give, and we don't have to receive, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we learn about energy, we realize that we really are this sort of vessel, and we need to both take in to recreate experience and to then be able to give out, and that there's a give and take there. That's really important. And one of the things that I think is very cool and fascinating to think about in terms of this energy body stuff is a teaching and a concept from Chinese medicine, which is the idea of the Wei Qi, W-E-I, either, and then Qi is spelled either C-H-I or Q-I, depending on how people, there's different ways of spelling it. And so Qi is one of the ways that we know or refer to energy, and that comes just from traditional Chinese medicine. And this idea of Wei Qi is basically that we have all these qis within our body traveling throughout different channels. Wei Qi is the external qi that surrounds our body. And it gets, it's a long, complex, beautiful story of how Wei Qi is formed, but essentially it's formed here in what they call the spleen energy in Chinese medicine. And it's grasped by the lungs and distributed up and out of the body. I envision it like this fountain that comes out and surrounds us. And Wei Qi is our protective energy force according to traditional Chinese medicine. And what I love about Wei Qi, and the reason why I'm sharing it in particular, is that in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, they did not recognize or talk about an immune system. So that the immune system was it was not seen as an organ system or anything in particular. Wei Qi was how, and is in traditional Chinese medicine, largely how they talk about an immune system, because as our external force that surrounds our energy body, it helps to protect us from external influences. And they have different ways of talking about external influences in Chinese medicine. One of them is the external influence of what they call pernicious influences or pernicious forces, which are usually elemental. Things like wind or cold that can invade the body. And if you have weak Wei Qi, you're more likely to catch a chill or get a wind from being exposed to the elements than if you have strong Wei Qi. And then the other would be these external forces, like what we now know through the germ theory of disease as being virus or bacterial infections, are also considered to be, we would talk in Western science, we'd talk about the immune system fights off those pathogens. And maybe on a more superficial level, our mucous membranes protect us from exposure through the eyes, ears, nose, or mouth from those kinds of pathogens. But in Chinese medicine, they would say it's the strength of your Wei Qi. It's that external force of energy around you that actually is your first line of defense against these invaders of all sort, whether it be elemental or bacterial or viral or what have you. So we can really, in the wisdom of that teaching of the Wei Qi, we can really see the dynamic interplay between how we might see the energy body as both caring for our spiritual being and our physical being, in the way that we separate it traditionally in the Western medical model, right? A lot of traditional cultures don't separate it at all, but we do often in our culture. So we can see the fact that they're inseparable, which I think is really powerful and important to recognize.
Totally.
Yeah. So there's three kind of ways that I want to talk about supporting our energy bodies today. And the first is going to be through the practice of burning herbs. And I'll just go through briefly and then we'll go into them. So we're going to talk about burning herbs and smudging. But even if it's not smudging, even just generally burning herbs is a powerful practice in that way. We're going to talk about spritzing, which is more of an aromatherapeutic practice that also strengthens the energy body. And we're going to make a spritz together. So I can show you what that's like. And then we're going to talk about a form of spiritual plant bathing that we're going to do with a bundle of these live evergreens that I have. And we'll talk about, how to do all these practices and then how you might be able to implement them for your unique situation that you have. Sound good?
Yeah, let's dive into it. I'm excited.
Okay. So, the practice of smudging, and I'm going to mostly approach it through this idea of burning herbs, because at its essence, burning herbs is one of the oldest forms of herbal medicine. And what you start with when you talk about burning herbs is an aromatic plant. And what happens is that when you burn the herb, you release the aromatic volatile oils that are usually on the surface of the plant, but depending on the plant may also be locked inside the plant. You burn those, and as the plant burns, those oils evaporate into the air. And you get the medicine of the aromatics in the air alongside the smoke. So the significance of that is twofold. One is that when you burn, just thinking about the elements, when you burn something, you're taking something that's physical of the material world, of the earthly realm, and you're using the power of fire to transform it into a different substance. And that's what elementally fire is, the great transformer. So when we take something like this white sage, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and we burn it over the flame here, we're actually unlocking the earth element. We're transforming it into the air element, or what I refer to often as the spirit realm. So we're basically taking something from the earth and we're transforming it into spirit. And the way I think of it is, I use smudging a lot, both in my personal energy hygiene practice and my personal spiritual practice, and also in my work with students and clients. And one of the things that I think about, particularly in groups or circles of people, is this idea that to smudge or to burn herbs is to bring the breath of spirit into the group, because that's sort of what we're doing. We're creating smoke as an offering to spirit, and we're also using it as a way to bring that spirit energy into our circle. So cultures around the world use a huge diversity of aromatic herbs for burning. And there's lots of different practices. I've traveled extensively in South America, where we see lots of Catholic churches where they're burning a huge variety of resins and beautiful things. Frankincense is a common one, myrrh. And you start to associate those smells with certain things. That's one of the powers of smell, actually, is that the strong association that we have with it to shape time and mark experience. So in other words, there's no right herb to smudge with or burn. You can use anything. And I pulled out two different ones. One is this white sage. This is Salvia apiana. And this is a traditionally an herb that's traditionally grown in the Southwest. And it really thrives in that environment, that yang environment, to continue to weave that thread in, that bright, hot sunlight, and that more desert condition. So it likes dry and it likes heat. It will not overwinter here in my northern climate. So I grow it as an annual. It can be started indoors in the greenhouse, and then it can be cultivated, and I'll harvest it in the fall. And I like to harvest it on a really bright, hot, sunny day, because that's when the resins are strongest and most powerful and will hold up best through the drying process. And you have two options. Once you pick it, you can just dry it loose, which is what I've done. And I really like this because it doesn't create as much smoke when you burn it if you just burn one small leaf. Or the other option is to wrap it into something called a smudge stick. And the smudge stick is a traditional Native American preparation, and of course varying amongst different tribes. This is an example of a smudge stick that a student made for me, and this actually this is a more atypical smudge stick, a bioregional smudge stick, if you will. It doesn't actually have sage in it. It has cedar and sweet fern, and these little daisies. I don't even know what variety of daisies that she used, but you can see, hopefully you can see on screen here, that she wove it in with beads and has these beautiful daisies that are kind of sticking out here. And so really there's endless possibilities. Really what you're going for are things that will be aromatic and that for you possess a powerful spirit. That's the most important thing. And here's where we're kind of practicing a pan-American herbalism. It's not just one strict we're really calling on the wisdom of all these cultures and using the plants that we have access to. So, but this white sage is what I'll start with here. And as I mentioned, this I grew in my garden. And so for me, I like to use just a single leaf because it creates less smoke. You'll see that it creates quite a bit of smoke. And when you burn something like this, it creates a lot of smoke. So be mindful if you're in a public space or if you're in an apartment building with sensitive smoke detectors. I take my smoke detector down when I do smudging practices, depending on how I'm doing it. If you live in an environment where you think that it wouldn't work to burn herbs inside, never fear. The next technique we're going to talk about is completely safe for all environments. So I usually start with a candle, and that will provide the fire element that you need to start that process. If you're burning resins, you can also start with a charcoal burner, or I'll take a coal out of my wood stove. And nearby, I always have a dish with some sand in it or some kind of earth. So again, that's the grounding of the earth element, but it's also for safety reasons to have a place to put the fire or to put it out if needed. If you have a potted plant nearby, I'm sure that it would also be happy to lend services to you to use for that purpose. So I'm going to stand up for this because when I smudge, I like to be able to access my whole body, and I'll try to speak up. If you can't hear me, Nick, just let me know. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna light this, and once I light it, I pretty much immediately blow it out. And I really work a lot with the number 3 because it's a common thing that we see in nature. A couple examples, like the 3 trimesters of pregnancy, that's a great example. But there's lots of rules of 3 that we see. And so for me, I do circular and swiping motions around my body when I smudge, usually in 3s. So I start with my crown and I do about 3 circles around. And then I come over to the side of my body and I usually swipe about 3 times. And then I do 3 circles under the palm of my hand, 3 swipes under the armpit, and then I go down and around my leg, under my foot, and then the other side. It's very common that you need to relight because it will go out, which is fine. And then I'll switch hands. I'll do the other side, under my hand, under the armpit. And then I do the kind of core of my body with 3 big circles, and I do the back with 3 big circles. And going back to that idea of Wei Qi and the traditional Chinese medicine concept of the Wei Qi, one of the most vulnerable places to receive an external pernicious influence is the back of the neck. So I'm often very mindful of really getting some good energy around there in the back of my neck. And then I usually like to shake it out a little bit. Like I like to shake my feet and kind of just like get it. For me, it feels like the integration more deeply into my body. But I think that on another level, it literally is releasing the nervous system, releasing any tension that you might have in your body. And so what is this practice of smudging doing, and how is it affecting our energy body? So it is partly that. Sorry, there was a weird playback. I got distracted from it, but partly it's this idea of the earth element becoming the spirit element, but the other piece is the release of these aromatic oils. And aromatics are some of the most potent and powerful forms of chemical substances in herbal medicine, and they've been used since antiquity to promote higher consciousness and deeper connection with the divine. And one of the ways I like to think of that working is that when aromatics are released, they go right into the olfactory senses, and they immediately affect our neurochemistry. And they help that in that, for me, what they're doing is helping to clear and make space in the mind for us to be more available to access this consciousness that is both within us and sort of outside of us in terms of how we connect with spirit or higher consciousness. So it's to me, it's the oldest form. I think cooking and burning herbs are the two oldest forms of aromatherapy practiced in the world. And that this kind of modern use of aromatherapy with essential oils, I think, is awesome. It's sort of further removed. It's like more highly processed. Whereas I right now just have this plant with me, and I'm able to access that aromatherapeutic property just from being with the plant and my candle here, which I think is sort of liberating in a way. So that's my kind of, I was doing it and demonstrating to you and talking throughout the whole thing. But normally when I smudge, it's a very relaxing, quiet, and gentle practice for me. I'm usually quiet. I light my candle with intention. I smudge with intention. And my intention is both to clear the excess, clear the detritus in the mind and in the energy body, and also to protect, to strengthen that Wei Qi. And so again, we go back to that blurry line between how we are expressing ourselves, how our energy body is a filter through which we express and a filter through which we receive. And I think that smudging has the opportunity to kind of strengthen the field on both levels. So the sage, I wanted to start with because I think actually Nick, David Winston. I think that you've collaborated with him before, but he's a really powerful herbalist and teacher. And one of the things that I learned from him is this idea of burning different herbs, having different medicinal properties depending on how they smell. So again, you can imagine that I would love this, because going back to the tea meditation, this idea that we can actually tune directly into the medicine of the plant through our senses rather than what we're taught or told. And so what David Winston has taught me is that the more pungent an herb smells when it burns, the stronger, and think of pungency as sort of spicy, minty, maybe even bitter a little, if you can imagine smelling bitter, the more purifying it is. Think of pungency or bitterness or spiciness cutting through, right? Like just a clean cut. So it's purifying and cleansing to the energy field. So if you were feeling that you had energy that was sort of polluting you, was no longer serving you, wasn't in service to your highest good, maybe you felt kind of inhibited by that energy, that it was clouding your focus, or something of that nature, then something like sage or something else pungent is very powerful to use in those moments. If, on the other hand, you're wanting to promote more deeper protection, or you're wanting to more focus on sealing your energy body, not losing too much energy, not giving away too much energy, then you want to focus on things that are sweeter smelling. And the sweet smelling herb that I picked to use as an example is cedar. And this is Thuja occidentalis. This is the common arborvitae tree, which is very common in urban planning, and it's sort of like a suburban icon, often used as a hedge. And you can use that medicinally. I also have some red cedar that we'll use a little later for something else. But this is a really beautiful, again, bioregionally available plant, although probably grown in a lot of places elsewhere in the country. And it has a real beautiful sweetness to it. And I don't always smudge with this in the same way, because it doesn't like stay lit in the same way that sage does, but to still burn it as part of an intentional ritual or just as part of a practice is really helpful. So what I do when I burn it is I actually just hold it above. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just holding it above to use the heat of the candle to activate the oils. So in this sense, I wish you could smell. But in this sense, I'm not actually burning this plant. I'm just heating the oils on the plant itself. And this is fresh. I picked this about 10 minutes before we began. So through that popping, through that, the heat is actually just popping and making those oils crackle, and they're being released into the air.
Wow.
Yeah, and it not only is it like magical and just you're like so amazed, it's amazing, but it's much less smoky. So if folks are sensitive to smoke, this can be a really good practice. A couple other examples of sweet smelling herbs. Sweetgrass is a traditional Native American herb used a lot, and again to bring in sweetness, to protect, to create community, to remember. It's used a lot as a remembering herb, to remember and connect with culture and place. So sweetgrass is another great example. Palo Santo, which is a resinous wood from South America, has both sweet and pungent smells. Copal has a sweet and pungent smell. Frankincense and myrrh are more on the pungent spectrum. Tobacco, also traditionally used in a lot of Native cultures for smudging or just burning in ritual, also has a more pungent smell.
Mm-hmm.
So we can see that and it's not to simplify, these herbs have much more medicine than just saying, pungent or sweet, but it is to just kind of categorize them to help to, in a large scale, zoom out vision, see how we might be able to apply them.
Yeah. Very, very cool.
Yeah. Do you have any questions about that or thoughts that you want to share?
So I was just going to ask you, going back to the understanding of smoke. I've just in my travels, I've come across a few different healers that are able to watch the smoke. And I know this is maybe, I'm not trying to this may not be something that you do at all. This might be completely, foreign, but I just felt compelled to bring it up that with the smudging, I've watched my friend Sebastian, who's a Kero Pampamisayok, shaman in Asangate. He'll guide the smoke around you, and he'll guide the smoke around the room, and he'll be watch the way the smoke interacts, and he'll know something by I guess just going back to the subtlety, the idea of paying attention to subtlety, but that we were talking about during the tea drinking. He'll look at the smoke and he'll see something. He'll watch how the smoke does that, and he'll be like, that's not the natural movement for that smoke right there around that corner. There must be something here. And he'll then do something else based on that distinction he makes. So when you were smudging yourself, I was just thinking that was an interesting practice. The idea of understanding, interacting, and noticing the way that smoke dances around in front of you as you're working with it.
That's one of the most beautiful things that I've ever heard, because it's not just the smoke, but it's also how the smoke is making visible the invisible, because
Mm-hmm.
there's these air currents and patterns that are moving around us all the time. And it's not until we have something viscous in the air that we can actually see how those things are moving. Sometimes we can feel them, but it's not often that we have gusts of wind traveling through our homes, right? But we do have subtle movements of air patterns that are happening. And so again, it's just that idea of the earthly into the spiritual. It's actually it's making the invisible visible. And this, I've never done that myself. I don't know that I'd have to practice a lot, I think, to be able to master. But I can see and understand how you would be able to not only learn the tendencies of that smoke, but the tendencies of smoke around people and in the environment. And you'd be able to say there's a large energy here in this part of your body, and the smoke is moving around it in a way. And, to be able to see that. And I'm going to think about that more, because when I studied plant spirit medicine, that was one of the things that we did, was sort of these various practices to learn how to be able to see energy in people's energy body. And I never thought about using smoke as a way to pick up on that. I really,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't take anything for granted. It's you hear about when you're in elementary school and high school, how the Native American people, they used every part of the animal and they never threw anything out. Yeah, but that's just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg of what that intentionality, what that relationship really is like. There is nothing taken for granted. There's nothing yeah. Pretty cool. I was just going to also ask you, what role does I know that I own one. Actually, I might have one right next to me. Maybe not. a lot of times you see smudging and there's like there's a seashell, like there's an abalone shell that's kind of accompanying like the practice. Is there symbolism there that sort of weaves into like the elemental side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the bringing in and the presence of the water element to balance the fire and the earth and the air. So if we think of smoke as being an embodiment of the air element, then if we have the abalone shell or any kind of shell for our burning herbs, then we're then having all of our elements at play with us. So that's the kind of power of that. So I usually, and I would encourage folks to do that. And it doesn't have to be an abalone shell. It could be a shell that you just find. And I'm more a fan of using a shell that you find than actually purchasing an abalone shell if you don't have the access to find one of those. But usually where I smudge, it's on an altar of sorts. So on my altar, I have all the elements. I usually have a small dish of water. And actually here for one of our next exercise, I have a dish of water as well. So I do think that can be, I don't think it's a requirement, but I think it can be a powerful addition to the practice to integrate the elements, all the elements. Yeah.
Cool.
Good.
Sweet.
So should we do the next one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I'm going to move my fire element a little bit to the side here, as well as my sage. And I'll say that really anytime I'm using herbs, I'm always mindful to use them with intention. And I also practice gratitude for them. I think especially when you're using plants in a ceremonial way, but anytime you're using plants for healing, I always say thank you to them. So even when I'm done with my smudging ritual, I say thank you. And certainly when I pick the plants, like this cedar, for example, or my sage, I say thank you. And that's part of, for me, practicing that deep connection. So when I, have been smudging for years, my mom used to smudge us. And then, it kind of became part of my work and my personal practice. And then I started teaching and traveling all over the country to teach. And I couldn't bring my smudging herbs, not only because it didn't make sense to be burning them in hotel rooms or in public conference centers, but also just because I needed something that was more versatile. I felt that there was actually a need for me to be integrating these practices more deeply into other parts of my life. And I didn't always have access to burning herbs, both logistically and practically. And so the big impetus was that I was teaching a class on women's health at the University of Massachusetts here, but I couldn't be burning herbs inside my classroom at the university. So I developed and I'm sure that other people have done this over the years too. This is maybe not a new idea, but what I decided to start doing is what I call making these spritzes. I call them spritzes. And so what I have here is a 2-ounce glass bottle. Any color will work. This one's amber. And on top is what's called an atomizer, AKA a spray bottle top. And so this is like a cosmetic version of what you'd use to water your houseplants or clean your toilet. It's just like, a spray bottle top. And it has just a top here. And you can purchase these often at a health food store or a natural food store, or you can get them from varying places online. And what I have, again, this is 2 ounces, and I've just filled it about, almost full, about up to where the bottle starts to go inward with plain water. And I would say that folks can use whatever water they use for drinking. In this, I personally look more favorably upon well water or spring water. But I also believe that we are one with our environment and connected with our environment. And so if you're drinking tap water from a municipal source, then you should probably be using tap water from a municipal source in your energy medicine, because that tap water from a municipal source is part of your body. And therefore your energy body is going to respond favorably to that. If you drink filtered water from a municipal source, use that in this as well. So this is well water from my well here. And what I'm going to do, so I mostly have water in it. And then what I do is I add some essential oils to it and some flower essences. And then I shake it up, and anytime I want to use it, I just spray myself with it. So I'll pass this around on our first day of class, or anytime we do introductions or, get to know each other activities in my classes. Folks will just spray themselves and they make funny faces, and it helps them break down their barriers and their walls and get to know each other. But I also have made these before for clients who have really intense work environments that they need to, especially people who are maybe, a great example is a student of mine who was a social worker who was working in a really intense environment. And so I made her one of these, and she sprayed it between her clients, and it transformed her work, and it changed how people were in session with her because it was shifting the energy so much and helping to clear the energy between working with different people. You can bring it with you in your car if you have a long day and you need to switch energy between a meeting or, 1-year-old right now. I can't tell you how many times a day I have to switch gears, right? And switch my energy from one focus to the next. Something like this can just be a really nice way to help you kind of help your spirit and your physical body to transition with you in those ways.
Mm-hmm.
So this is sort of like the modern version of smudging, but it's also calling on the ancient practice of aromatherapy. So here we go. I have my water, and I thought that we would just make a very, very, very simple spritz, kind of cleansing and protecting spritz.
Cool.
This is some lavender essential oil that I have that was actually distilled from lavender plants that grow here on my property. I grow like 75 bed feet of lavender, and we steam distilled this just this summer. So I'm going to put 5 drops of this lavender essential oil into my 2 ounces of well water. And then I have some Rescue Remedy. And for folks that are unfamiliar, Rescue Remedy is a flower essence developed from the Bach flower essence tradition. And it's a blend of 5 flowers that are designed to help recenter you in the body, to relax the spirit and the mind, and really help to, some of these are my words, but it's used for stress, anxiety, tension, trauma, really the whole range of things that can be causing distress to the human spirit. It can even be used for sleep. And I find Rescue Remedy to be really powerful, both internally. You can put 3 drops on the tongue in a glass of water. You can put 3 drops in a glass of water, or in something aromatherapeutic like a spritz. And going back to what we talked about earlier today, we talked about that idea of, more isn't always better. Flower essences are a perfect example. Flower essences are the essence or the energy of the plant that has been, basically captured, if you will, although I don't really like to use that word, but has been basically the essence has been extracted and put into this form. And then you have the spirit of the plant in this liquid form. And what they say about flower essences is that the more it is diluted, the more it spreads out, and therefore the more powerful it becomes. It's not, and so it's not always that more is better. In fact, sometimes less is more in this situation. So what I do is 3 drops, again, that's my magic number, 3 drops of the flower essence into the spritz bottle as well. And then you just put the lid on it and shake it up, and that's that. Now, you could use any essential oil and any flower essence. You can also use flower waters or hydrosols. And I really enjoy doing that. Whenever we make essential oils, we have hydrosols left over, which usually smell really wonderful, and you can use them that way. You can also purchase flower waters. The most common ones are rose water and orange blossom water, which have a very strong aroma, but you can use those as the base of this with or without essential oils. I often, in the summer months, I'll buy rose water from the store, pour it into a bottle like this, and whenever I'm hot, I just spray myself, because rose water is not only an incredible heart opener and a beautiful healer for the spirit, but it's also amazingly cooling and soothing and refreshing. So I just spray it, and when my students are hot, I just pass around that rose hydrosol and let them spray themselves. It's really good for after lunch sleepy.
Yeah.
So you can use any combinations. Other ones that I really like, the citrus family, like lime, lemon, orange, grapefruit, all have a very uplifting aromatherapy quality to them. So if folks feel that they want a little bit more of that uplifting quality for the spirit, activate the senses, elevate the mood, then citrus is a really nice way to go. I like clary sage a lot for grounding the feminine energy or the yin energy. And I also really like rose geranium and rose as heart openers. And basil and Tulsi basil are also really, really good for helping us to reach our full potential as human beings when we feel that we've been held back, or that we're having a hard time letting our true selves shine. They can be really good for confidence building and kind of opening up in that way. And then of course, flower essences. I mean, there's, or just essences in general. I don't just use flower essences. I use gem or stone essences. I use essences of place. So you can use any kind of essence that you feel you're gravitating towards. This basically becomes a place where you can put your plant allies, herbs that you like the smell of or the medicine, alongside essences that are your plant allies right in here, and then use aromatherapeutically to strengthen the energy body.
Very cool.
I'll have to spray myself.
It seems so easy. You know, that's such an easy and obvious way to use herbs.
Yeah, it really is. It's so easy. And lavender is one of the herbs we're going to talk about in our next section as well. And the aromatherapy is one of the most powerful parts of it. Aromatic herbs, right? We had our tea meditation with an aromatic herb. We burned aromatic herbs. We're spritzing with aromatic herbs. And the aromatics have that mind, body, spirit connection that you were talking about before, because they engage with so many senses. They are some of the most powerful herbal medicines that we have access to.
Very cool. Yes, something that I do, and it's probably sort of a departure, but hopefully not too much of a departure, is sometimes I have like a number of different essential oils. Cedar oil is one of my favorite ones. And in the middle of it's amazing how fast a spritz like that can, or just the smelling of an essential oil can change your state of mind. Like I could be in a state of mind that's just, you know, starting to get funky. Like, you know, throughout your day, you have like, you know, how many things happen to us throughout the day these days, especially like, you know, with the you know, access to technology and just interacting with so many different people, and sometimes you feel funky, and then like I'll just take some cedar oil or whatever it might be, and just put a little bit on my palm, and just go like this, and just go like this, and then I'll kind of put it over my body like that, and somehow that makes everything, it clears everything. It changes my entire state of mind. So I mean, I feel like it's maybe similar to what we're talking about here with the spritz. It's kind of got you're sort of using these aromatics of the herb.
Yeah, I feel like you just added a whole like fourth way of practicing with these things. That's basically, I'm saying this is like one of the tools I've developed over the years to make this happen. And you're saying this is your tool that you've used over the years to kind of make this happen. And what we are doing is we're using the power of the plant along with the power of our intention to transform our energy and shift our consciousness. And I think you bring up such an important point about technology, because one of the other ways that we are asked to shift our focus just repeatedly throughout our day, our week, whatever, is between the focus, the like kind of detailed, fine-tuned focus, and what that does to our vision when we look at a screen, and then the rest of the world, right? That transition between the screen time and daylight is actually really different, or from screen time to nighttime light. And that's another form of transition. And again, everywhere throughout our life. And we don't have enough tools to help ourselves through those transitions. So I love that. I think that's brilliant, you know, right on the hands, and then just like that. For folks who are sensitive, you might want to put the essential oil in a carrier oil first, so that you're not putting the essential oil directly on the skin. And you could do the same thing like this, but instead you could do like 2 ounces, do that. Yeah. I think I mentioned to you the other day when we were talking that one of the other practices I love to do is massage my body with oil as a way of sealing my energy body and kind of protective force field, and it's excellent for the nervous system. And so it becomes another way of, again, integrating that whole mind, body, spirit connection and the power that that can bring to all elements of your life, really.
I love the idea that, I know we have to move on, but I love the idea of the transition. Like, it's so hard. There's so many transitions that you have to go through and make every single day. Like, for me, I have two kids. I've got an 8-month-old and a 5.5-year-old. And sometimes, I'm not going to lie, like, if I'm going from like working really hard, like, and trying to like, serve the sacred science community in whatever way I possibly can, and I have to walk right into being a dad, it's like, watch out for at least 15 minutes. Like, don't like, you know what I mean? And I don't like it. It's a part of myself that I don't like, but at the same time, I kind of, anyway, the practice of parenting goes hand in hand with the practice of self-forgiveness, because you're going to screw up all the time. But anyway, but the idea of having ways and agents and allies to kind of help you with that transition. Like, I was just thinking as I was talking to you, I'm like, man, before I left this office, if I could just do like that and make have something or burn something, and just know that this is like the end of the day. Yes. Now I'm going to go into the next role. It's very important, and it's ceremony and it's ritualistic, it's yeah.
Yeah. I think that if you developed a ritual practice for yourself to help you make that transition and that shift, would be immensely helpful. Mm-hmm. Probably in ways that, because it's the setting of the intention, and it's the marking of I'm leaving that behind now, and I'm moving into this new space of like being with these two kids, and it is totally different, right? Mm-hmm. And what do we do with kids as parents? What we do with our kids to help them transition is that we create routine for them, right? And we know that when they're on their routine, they have a smoother, more authentic experience of their world. And so we mm-hmm. need to do that for ourselves too, but we forget. And so one of the ways we can do that is by having these routines and these rituals around how we create space for ourselves that helps hold the container and therefore helps us to transition. Same thing with sleep. When I have clients who have a hard time sleeping, I always help them make a bedtime routine, because the bedtime routine is the leaving behind of the day and the transition into that other space. So I love the idea of your essential oil thing becoming something that you do when you're done with work. I think a spritz could also be really helpful. And the other thing I would suggest as a potential thing to try is to light a candle when you begin your work, so that the candle is actually holding space for you while you work, and then you can blow it out when you're done. And so it's just one other thing that's helping to create a container that marks, this is my work time. Now I'm going to blow this out, and now I'm moving on to the next thing.
Oh my God.
So those are some.
The idea of creating a container, you just like blew my mind open right there. I have to like just think about that a little bit better. Like, just creating containers, because it's just, containers are also kind of like contracts. Like, there's also like anyway. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really big into the container, and the way I see this work playing out in relationship to that concept is that our physical body is the container for our emotional human spirit. And so when we're doing work, when we're working with our container, when we work with our routines and the rituals in the earthly realm and feeding ourselves well and sleeping well, it's about setting up the human body to be a powerful container that can further our spirit's evolution by creating that safe space for it to thrive, right? And and I love the parenting metaphor here again, because like you're basically saying you have to go out and hold space for these kids, and it's like really hard because the shift is like a big deal. So anything you can do to help create the holding of that container, both in your work life, your personal life, and with the kids, always helps to make those things smoother and go better. So yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, I that was awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So we have this one, well, like one more, as if it's the only other thing. There's many other ways that we can kind of your body, but this is the other one that we're going to talk about today. And this is the practice that I have comes to me from the lineage of Rocio Alarcón, who I don't know if you know her, but she's an amazing Ecuadorian healer. And she has a lot of really brilliant teachings, but one of them is this idea of the spiritual plant bathing, which I think is a very common of the healing traditions of South and Central America, but that's how I have learned it from Rocio. And what, you know, she talks about is that these plants, they are our teachers, and they have energy, just the way that you and I have different energies. These plants contain and possess energies. And that energy embodies the plant as an energy body, the same way that our body, our energy embodies us as an energy body. And so when we pick plants and when we have them, we can engage with their energy by using them within our energetic force field. Spiritual plant bathing this is a smaller version of what I've learned from her, but what it's basically about is using and inviting or asking the spirit of the plant to help us to cleanse our energy body, but instead of burning them, or instead of aromatizing them, if that's a word. That's not a word, but I made that up. We are actually just using the actual plant. And the important thing here is that the plants be the ideal thing, let's say the ideal thing is that these plants be fresh, and that they be freshly picked, and that they be picked or harvested in a ceremonial way that doesn't have to be involved, but that is intentional. So for me, it involves, before picking, I take a quiet minute with the plant to tune into the energy. I have different affirmations that I wait for. Usually for me, it's something that has to do with wind. Usually if I'm going to get an affirmation from spirit, the wind blows. And so I'll wait to receive some kind of affirmation. It might also just be a feeling in your body that the plant is giving you permission to harvest. But I ask permission, and then once I've been given that permission, I harvest in a way that is good for the plant, so a sustainable way to continue plant growth. And then afterwards, I say thank you. So the ceremonial harvesting of the plant can be that simple. And it could also be much more involved. I mean, you could bring out some of your smudging supplies and you could smudge the implements that you use to harvest the plant. You could leave an offering or a gift. Most of the plants I harvest are from my farm, my homestead. And so I'm living in dynamic relationship with all the plants here on this property all the time. And so I am, kind of in the spirit of working with the whole land. I'm in that relationship all the time. I have different practices that I use if I'm in an environment that I'm not in relationship with continuously. Like if I'm in a wild harvesting environment, I have a tendency to be more involved, leave more gifts, and just kind of be a little bit deeper. But I make gifts to my land here all the time. So we're kind of in like, a container together all the time. So anyways, what I have here is cedar, the same cedar that we used for burning, Thuya occidentalis, as well as this juniper or red cedar, which is Juniperus virginiana. These are two evergreens that are available to me despite the foot of snow that's outside my door, that lend themselves really well to this plant bathing practice that we're going to do. And you can use any plant that you have, but again, a fresh plant that you've harvested in an intentional way is going to be optimal. So during the summer months when my garden's in full bloom, I use all kinds of plants ranging from Tulsi, basil to regular culinary basil to culinary sage and lavender and calendula and anise hyssop, really any plant. I do like to focus on a combination of, I usually include at least some aromatic herbs because those aromatics have that same enlightenment and stimulation to the olfactory senses that helps our shift in consciousness, which I think is really powerful. But you can use any plant that you are relating to or connecting with. So, and then I have a container of water. And again, this is water from my well. This could be from you're not going to ingest this through the mouth. So it could also be wild water from a river or a lake or a stream or a spring. It can also be, again, municipal water from your tap. But what I do is I get the water, and I let it sit out for usually several hours, ideally in the sun or by the light of the moon, to start to infuse some elemental energetics into that water and kind of bring what I call the essence of place into this, so that we are, again, really deeply integrating and connecting ourselves to this larger web of the universe that we're a part of, that we often just kind of overlook. So today, about 11 o'clock this morning, I ran the water from my tap and got this, and I left it sitting in a sunny window in preparation for this demonstration today. So it doesn't have to be any certain number of hours, but it's just with that intention, you know, kind of preparing the water and having it start to fuse with the environment is partly how I do it. So I'm going to stand up again. And what I do is I just dip the tips of the plant into the water, and I start to pat myself, and you're kind of spraying, you're kind of like, you're basically lightly hitting yourself with this bundle of herbs. You're spraying yourself with the water. And so, you know, I think it's really important and helpful here to think about that water element and the power of the water element. Water is passive and flexible and kind of always moving in its force field. It's always taking the shape of whatever container it's given. And so it has this wildness to it, this freedom that I think that we often crave and need more of in our culture. It's also very cooling. It has a real sensualness to it, and is a huge part of what makes up the structure of our body. If it weren't for water, we would crumble and blow away like sand in the desert. Water holds things together and really creates structure in an important way. So bringing the medicine of the water into it, the sun or the moon, whatever the water sat within, the earth that it came from, right? All water is coming from the earth. In my case, it came from really deep in the earth. And then we have, of course, the healing power of these plants. And so you can do this to yourself or with somebody else. In my classes, we often go down, I have a huge field of mint, and we go down to the mint field and we like pick these herbs and we do it to each other, which is wonderful. It can be done in a ceremonial way. It can be done really casually and really fun. You know, you can do it with kids on a hot day just to cool them off, or you can do it as part of a blessing way ceremony. You can do this to someone who has passed on. You can do this as a way of cleansing the energy body and helping them to transition. There's a lot of really powerful ways that it can be used, but once you get the plant in the water, you can smell the bringing together of those elements. And I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure you have, you've been outside and it's a windy, blustery day and the rains, maybe there's rain, maybe there's just moisture in the air, and you come inside, or your dog comes inside, or your honey comes inside, and you smell yourself or you smell them, and they smell fresh. Do you know that smell? I always said they smell like the outdoors. That was always the connotation I had. That's the smell of negative ions. It's highly charged particles in the air, and it's usually from the interaction of moisture and movement, aka wind and water, interacting in the environment. These highly charged particles, and they oxygenate the air. And I can smell that happening on a subtle level, nothing like being outside in a storm, but on a subtle level, just from doing this practice of kind of moving around. So I'm actually charging the air around me, clearing the energy body, and really just kind of moving things along. So this is a powerful for both cleansing and protection, as are these other two things that we talked about. Rocio taught me that once you've used this bundle to clear the energy body, it now needs to be composted back into the earth. There's different ideas of how that needs to be done. She talks about really like digging a hole and burying it in the earth. I think that depending on, you know, your intentions and how you're feeling and what you're releasing, that might be a really powerful and important gesture. Other times I think simply putting it into your compost pile in an intentional way is okay. But the idea is that these are now holding the energy that you moved and transformed in your practice.
So this is like, I wonder if Rocio, she's from Ecuador, you said?
Yeah.
I wonder if they probably don't. Do they do any kind of a Temescal or sweat lodge? They probably don't down there. That's more of a Central American Maya type lineage. Because that bundle, the herb bundle, and like,
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, honestly, like you see that also, it's crazy. This is like just, you know, earth wisdom. I mean, this happens all over the place. If you could be like in a Russian banya, same thing. Like there'll be a bundle of herbs that'll be just like
Exactly.
smacked around.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like what we do. I mean, you know, if people who are connected to like the, you know, their folk traditions, like that's just part of it. Like there's like that does happen. It's very weird.
Yeah.
Very
So
cool.
it's no means specific to Rocio. It's more just, you know, that her practice, it's very important to her practice of healing to use these bundles of herbs. But I, you know, I think you're right. I think probably any traditional healing system has these uses of aromatic plants, and we probably see people, you know, cleansing with them and using them aromatherapeutically in a lot of different ways. I mean, what was that in the bubonic plague? They carried the posy around their neck that was full of like peppermint and sage and these garlic that would supposedly ward things away. It's the same concept, using the power of these energetic plants, whether they're engaging with them spiritually or not. It's all about just, you know, that kind of holding space and helping to create that solid container of protection.
So cool. So like one through line that we've said many times throughout the last 90 minutes is these are all the aromatic qualities of these herbs are a very big factor in their space clearing, energy purifying, blessing, you know, characteristics.
Yep. Yeah. So that's our theme. And when we move into our next section, which we can do now, it's also going to be, we're going to talk about also aromatic herbs. So
cool. Let's do it.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah. Is my sound? Maline's chatting me privately, telling me that my sound's a little bit messed up. Is it okay? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I've actually been able to hear you. There's been a few times when there's been like a weirdness, but I can still understand. Like it always comes through. It might just be lagged or muffled, but then it comes through.
Cool. Everybody who's listening, sorry if there's a little bit of, I don't know what's going on. I live in Boulder now, but apparently Boulder does not have the best internet. That's just something that we've just realized. It's a beautiful place in every other possible way, but technologically speaking, you know, they're still in like the 90s here.
Yeah, well, hey, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay to have a slow transition. So I think given the theme of what we're talking about, it's okay that there might be a lag on a couple of our voiceovers. So
well, thank you for holding space for my lag. I appreciate that.
Of course. So can you see these little dishes?
I can see them. I can't really make out what's in them, but I can see them.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's not. I mean, we would be doing. Here we go. If
is that
it
lavender?
was,
I think I see lavender in one of them. I see,
yeah.
Right? Yep, there you go.
Yeah. So
lavender's, yeah.
If it was, you know, the growing season, we could have fresh plants, but I have dried because I don't have these plants blooming in my garden right now. But this next section, we wanted to talk just a little bit about just herbs that we can use for both internally and externally to ground ourselves out and support sleep and anxiety and stress, things that like most of us at some point in our lives have a relationship with: stress, anxiety, restlessness, sleeping, depression. It's just sort of like part of who we are as human beings. We are emotional beings, and we experience these things as part of our roller coaster of life. And so to keep it simple, I just picked 3 herbs that I find to be really helpful allies in that work, both with myself and with clients. Of course, there's so many herbs we could talk about here, but I feel that picking 3 is a good place to start. And these are all aromatics, and they're all easily accessible. So first we have culinary basil. So this is the same basil that you're cooking with. It's Ocimum basilicum. And it is an amazing, powerful herb for the nervous system and for the digestion. And the relevance of those 2 systems coming together goes back to what we talked about earlier with the enteric nervous system, the nervous system that runs throughout the digestive system that is often called the second brain. And so this herb is acting on both the nervous system that governs the digestion and the nervous system that governs the rest of the body, which is the autonomic nervous system, our involuntary nervous system, and helping it to self-soothe and regulate regulate itself. So basil relieves tension throughout the body, including in the GI tract, as well as in the musculoskeletal system. It helps to open passageways, stimulate and support circulation. And it has this really amazing dual ability to both excite or stimulate and relax. And every single plant that we're going to talk about here, these 3 plants are all members of the mint family. And the mint family plants have this kind of, again, dual action of both stimulating and relaxing. And so what does that mean and how does that work? And really what it is that mint relieves tension, and I don't want to talk about mint generally, but basil as a representative of the mint family relieves tension in the musculoskeletal system and opens up these passageways for circulation of blood and lymph and chi and prana, whatever you want to call spirit or energy, to more freely move in the system, which stimulates the body. It stimulates the metabolism. And importantly, in our mentally focused culture, it stimulates blood flow to the brain, which helps us to feel alert and refreshed, which was that word that you used earlier that is so apropos for the mint family plants. And it literally is doing that kind of physiologically through its actions. And the other thing that basil does that it has that's really powerful is an affinity for the heart. And the heart, in Western medicine, we talk about the heart as this pumping organ that pumps blood throughout our body. And if we're lucky, it doesn't get clogged and we don't have a heart attack, right? Like that's sort of the extent of talking about the heart in Western medicine. But the heart is actually one of the most important centers of energy in our body. It is the largest energetic force in the body, and it's also the home of the human spirit. And so the heart, as an anatomical organ, sure, it pumps, but as a spiritual, visceral organ, it's actually in close relationship with who we are and that deep sense. And we have all these references in our culture to what that might mean. Our heart's calling, our heart's desire, our soul mate, all these things that we associate with the heart. And so really the expression of the deepest part of our character and the truest part of ourselves funnels through an opened heart. And so basil is one of many heart medicines that we can use to sort of soothe the heart and help open the heart to be both receptive to our life's calling and our life's work and the true essential nature of our spirit, but also to be able to have the confidence to let that shine. So both to receive again and to emit whatever the gifts of that may be. And I think it's an often overlooked herb. I mean, people love to cook with basil, sure, but not that many people are drinking basil tea. It's one of its cousins, Tulsi basil, has become very popular in recent years. And I do think highly of Tulsi, but I do not think that we should let Tulsi diminish our views of regular garden basil, of which this is one. So there's lots of varieties and cultivars of basil. There's lemon basils, there's cinnamon basils, there's all kinds of basils. You can use them interchangeably, although I would say that the regular garden basil, the Ocimum basilicum, has a tendency to have the highest oil contents and therefore might be the strongest medicine. So I use basil, loose basil, just like this in teas. You could also do a tincture of basil that you could use, and you can also use basil essential oil. So you could ingest it internally as a tea or tincture, and you could also use it externally as an aromatherapy. You could put it in your spritz. You could put a drop on your hand to do that wonderful. What are we going to coin this, Nick? What's the name of this?
I don't even know. It's like the Mr. Miyagi. He goes like that. I don't.
It's a transition.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways that you can engage in this. And if you have a garden and grow basil is a great option to use for the spiritual plant bathing practice that we used. I love bundles of fresh basil used as a cleansing bundle.
How would you use it for sleeping? If someone is trying to create that sacred container to be able to sleep better, which I think a lot of us could use. Yeah. What would you recommend with basil?
So one of my theories about sleeping is that, and it's a theory, but it's also been in 10 years of clinical practice, I've gotten to see the theory in action, is that partly we don't just create the container for good sleeping right before bed. We actually create it throughout our lives and throughout our day. And so everything that we do throughout our day actually affects our ability to sleep, from the way we hold space to the way we transition to how we schedule and manage our time, to the energy that we're engaging with every day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the important things I think that basil can teach us as sort of a gift is that to use it throughout the day as a way, as some of these other herbs as well, but as a way to stay calm, stay grounded and centered, is a really powerful and helpful way to then be set up for the body to be able to more easily slip into sleep when it's time, because you have less of a need to come down because you've been more grounded and focused and centered all day. So you could absolutely have a cup of basil tea before bed, or do some other kind of practice with basil. And I don't want to discourage anyone from doing that, because I think that it could be really helpful. That said, I think it's also really helpful to integrate basil into like more of a daily routine, and let that start to create this general lifestyle that supports sleep. I have a podcast that I made last year, I think, that is called A Healthy Sleep Lifestyle. And the whole thesis of the podcast is like, sleep is a lifestyle. You want to sleep well, it has to be something that becomes a part of your lifestyle. As an example, I'll share one of my favorite blends with you. I obviously have so many herbs, but I always have a house blend, the house tea blend that I pre-mix to have just easy, ready to use. And my all-time favorite house blend, probably in the last 3 years, is peppermint leaf, basil leaf, fennel seed, and licorice. And I'm using 1 part of basil, peppermint, and fennel, and then a smaller amount of licorice just for taste. It's a wonderful blend. It not only does it taste great, it relaxes and soothes the body. It has that amazing ability to both stimulate and relax. And it works well for a variety of constitutions. So I love it as my house blend because I can offer it to guests, and it's pleasing to the palate, and also just a really nice kind of welcome to my home. Have a cup of tea. So if folks are interested, that might be a really nice kind of gateway into having an herbal tea, loose leaf herbal tea that you kind of integrate into your daily life. And it's great for digestion too. Yeah. Awesome. So next we have lemon balm, is a traditional Western herb from the European Materia Medica. And it's also in the mint family. Its Latin name is Melissa officinalis. And Melissa is the Greek word for honeybee. And lore about Melissa goes back thousands of years, and is just, very much like, there's lots of different things, but this connection with the honeybee is like a very strong thing with Melissa, of course, because it's named after it. And I see a lot of wisdom in Latin names. They often tell a story about the plant. And in this case, the Melissa and the connection to the honeybee, I think, is huge insight into the medicine of lemon balm, which is that to think of the bee, and I'm sure that people have seen at least some kind of bee, even if it's not a honeybee. And the metaphor that we have culturally for the bee, or what we say about the bee, is that they're the busy bee. And, because they're always working. But if you relax and spend time with a bee, you sit down where there are bees pollinating, what you feel is actually an incredibly calm, rhythmic, grounded sense of energy. So despite the fact that they're working, they have this demeanor and this hum that is consistent, focused, clear, very relaxed and grounded the whole time. And to me, the wisdom of that is that is that when we have rhythm, when we have routine, the body thrives, right? Like it's like to be in a ritual of like chanting or listening to music or having your heart against the ground and feeling the heartbeat of the earth or the rhythm of a drum, right? That calms and soothes the nervous system. And so that is the medicine of the bee. It's like that we can, or how we can work and stay focused and stay driven and be in this like kind of sort of achievement driven society that we live in, and maintain that wisdom and that focus and that groundedness that the bee teaches us, right? And lemon balm, of course, embodies that medicine. And I use lemon balm to help ground people who are commonly overstimulated by either their own thoughts, their own energy, or by their environment. And so that could be overstimulated by loud noises, bright lights, busy schedules, or it could be overstimulated by feeling like they have too many expectations on them or too much to do. Or maybe somebody like opens up a book that's overstimulated or feels overwhelmed that they're not going to be able to like finish the book or finish a course or, whatever, any of those. So it's about, again, going back to that idea of creating space. It's like thinking about lemon balm as this way that we can relax the overwhelm that comes with overstimulation, so common in our culture, and remove the thickness that's there so that we can step into ourselves and be present and emotionally available. And so lemon balm is amazing for overstimulation, anxiety, restlessness. And it's a wonderful herb for helping to sleep because actually it helps to sedate the central nervous system. So it has a direct relaxing effect. The detail that's very important about lemon balm is that the fresh plant contains a higher content of volatile oils, and the volatile oils are what have the sedating properties. So it is fresh lemon balm that will help you sleep. Fresh lemon balm that will, soothe the nervous system and sedate and help you sleep. Dried lemon balm does not have that same high oil content. So while it's still wonderful for the nervous system, it contains lots of vitamins and minerals, it's incredibly nourishing, and it's still very good for overstimulation and such, it will not make you drowsy. So you could drink lemon balm tea all day long as a way to kind of stay grounded and soothed, and it would be excellent for you. And in fact, the more days in a row you drank it, the more profound those effects would be, because it's what we call a tonic herb where the benefits build over time. But if you wanted to use lemon balm to sleep, I would recommend the fresh plant. And so, you might be thinking, well, how do I do that? What if I don't have a garden? Usually tinctures, if you purchase a tincture and alcohol extract, it's made from fresh plant. And I usually advise that folks use tinctures to help sleep anyways, because you don't have to drink a whole cup of tea, which means that you're less likely to wake up to pee. So it usually means you sleep better. So I recommend alcohol-based tincture for helping to sleep. And I recommend the dried herb as a tea for daytime support. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Great. Any questions about that or thoughts?
No, I mean, I'm realizing now I don't really have much experience with lemon balm at all, but it's been all over my consciousness and been presented to me in various different ways over the last few months. And I am excited to start working with it for sure.
Yeah, good. And if you are able to grow it, it's a good one to grow because it's easy. It grows like a weed. It spreads, but not that aggressively. So I wouldn't worry about putting it in your garden. And then you have it available, and you can use it for your spiritual plant bathing also. So.
Amazing.
So
cool.
Last but certainly not least, we have lavender, which is that we already sort of talked about a little bit. And lavender gets a lot of attention. It's very popular in aromatherapeutics and cosmetics. And for good reason. It's a powerful aromatherapeutic plant. And it has a lot of culture and history behind it. Its Latin is lavandula, and there's lots of different varieties, but lavandula is the species, the genus, and then there's many different species. this particular variety is Lavandula angustifolia, which is an English variety that overwinters really well in northern climates. If you live in a more temperate climate, you can grow French, all kinds of French cultivars that are really good. And there's all different great varieties. But this one's very common also in commerce because the flowers hold the volatile oils really well through the drying process. So they lend themselves really well to custom all kinds of preparations. So lavender is, it has a lot of uses, but I want to focus really in on our theme today, which is this idea of sleeping and dreaming and anxiety and stress, and also just elevating the physical body to become a good home for our spiritual being. And lavender is amazing for helping to make space in the mind. So when we think of things like anxiety or depression, one of the things that can become so debilitating about those conditions is that they take up so much space that we become paralyzed and we can't think about other things, and it becomes hard to remove ourselves from that, to grant the perspective within the experience that would actually help us to get out of it. And so we become trapped. And one of lavender's greatest gifts is to soothe physical tension, similar to basil, but to soothe physical tension and to make spaciousness in the mind, to grant perspective in our experience, help us to see things differently, to be able to feel open to new experiences, open to new possibilities, and to be able to kind of light the way forward in those moments when we feel clouded or inhibited by our own thoughts and emotions. And it can do that in a lot of ways. And it can do that by taking it internally as well as by using it for its aromatherapeutic properties. Some things I like to do with lavender, I like to make lavender dream pillows or eye pillows. So if you're crafty and like to sew, you just make a simple pillow. It could be very small or it could be a little bigger. And to make a dream pillow, all you would do is stuff it with lavender, sew it up, and have the lavender on your bed or in a place maybe where you do your bedtime routine or some pre-bedtime yoga or meditating or something. And that way the relaxing aromatherapeutic properties of the lavender would come out into the air and you'd breathe it in and it would help you relax as you're winding down. Or, maybe it's in a spritz and you actually just spritz yourself before bed or before meditating or before you hang out with your kids as you're making that transition. All of those things are possibilities. I also really like to do eye pillows with lavender. And with the eye pillow, I make a bag, but I make it more like a rectangle that would fit comfortably over my eyes. And I do a combination of lavender and flax seeds because I really like the weight of the flax seeds, and the flax seeds don't smell, and combine those together. And then when I'm falling asleep at night, I put it over my eyes. And it's funny because I have this connotation with it as like a beauty regimen thing. But it's really what it does is the weight of the flax seeds actually apply gentle pressure on the eyes, which relax the muscles of the eyes and the face. And believe it or not, tension in the body is one of the biggest things that prevents us from sleeping. And we don't even always know it's there. We can have no idea that we're tense and we're lying in bed and we can't sleep. And if someone started touching you in certain spots, like these are big ones, the shoulders, the neck, it's like they would be like, oh my God, you're holding so much tension there. And if you can relax that, it helps to settle into the body and make that space to sleep. And so lavender in general helps to do that. But then the idea of the eye pillow providing that weight to kind of just gentle. This is not super heavy, but just gentle to relax those muscles really helps things relax. So if you're like me, you think that it's like a little beauty treatment, but it's more just not. It's actually more about the nervous system and really settling in to the body. A bunch of my students at UMass have enjoyed over the years putting a drop of essential oil on their pillow or on a hanky and stuffing that in their pillowcase as a way of getting the lavender aromatherapeutics into the environment. I personally am not a huge one for strong smells, so I have a tendency to just do like smaller amounts of lavender flowers in with my eye pillows, whatever works for you and feels appealing to you. And then internally, you can use lavender as well. I rarely make teas of just straight lavender. I'm more likely to put a pinch of lavender into another tea. One of my favorite after dinner teas that's in my cookbook is peppermint, sage, and lavender. And the lavender is just a small part, and you access the floral aromatics, and it's enough to create that medicinal effect in the body. And the other thing I love for lavender is a glycerin tincture. So instead of alcohol-based tincture, I like to use a glycerin tincture, which is sweet and syrupy. And so the lavender aromatics taste really sweet and delicious. And I find that the sweet taste is very soothing and relaxing. So lavender glycerin feels just like very relaxing and kind of immediately opens up that space that we were talking about, both in the body and in the mind. It's funny, I had a friend who was having a sort of like, she was freaking out a little bit the other day, and I said, "You're having anxiety." And I said, "What do you need? What do you need?" She said, "I need lavender." And luckily I could just turn around and I had lavender there. But once you start to work, I love that story, because once you start to work with these herbal allies, you actually come to know them as a friend. And it's like saying, "I need a hug," or "I need alone time," or "I need to go on vacation," or "I need to go to bed." I need my ally to kind of help me in this situation. And I think that in that way, plants are not only our teachers, but our role models and our companions. But it takes kind of developing that intimate relationship with them to know how we are going to embrace them in our life. And that's, to bring it full circle. That's why I love that the tea meditation that we started with, because it becomes a gateway, if you will, or an introduction into a deeper intimacy with the plant. And then as you work them into your routines or your rituals in other ways, you are more deeply integrating the practice and getting to know them. Like the same way that if you were getting to know a person, you would like meet them at a party, you'd get their phone number, you'd make a time to hang out with them, you'd start to develop a relationship. And it's the same thing. And on your first, hang out with that person, you'd probably be more likely to have a long, in-depth conversation. And as the relationship progressed, it would kind of transform. And I think that that's exactly how relationships with plants kind of unfold and become in that way.
So I love the idea of the eye pillow. I want to make one immediately, because it just feels like my body's, I don't know. It feels like it would be such an amazing thing to have at nighttime. It's just part of that ritual, like you said. I mean, some nights it's easy to kind of pass out, but other nights just having those extra couple things that just allow your body, like you said before, creating the container, so your body knows that it's about to step into a different space and that it's time for it to do this, to do this kind of a, power down routine. I think it's really, really important. But just the idea of I've heard of the lavender pillows before, but I've never heard of a lavender and flax eye pillow. It just seems like naturally, like that would just be such a nice thing just to kind of layer on when you were having a hard time sleeping. It just would be incredible.
It is the all-time best. And it really is. And that's, when you're having a hard time sleeping, you get that anxiety. Like, why am I not sleeping? I wish I was sleeping. This is going to be terrible for tomorrow, whatever the story is. And if you can just put that thing on your face and just, quiet the mind, it's really helpful.
Totally. And now I get why we started with peppermint tea, because we came full circle, like all these three mint herbs. It was very clever to get us down that road that early.
Actually, the only plants that we talked about today that are not mints are the cedars. Sage is a mint, lavender is a mint, and then the basil and the lemon balm are all mints. So yeah, pretty amazing. Only 2 plant families. Well, actually 3, but basically 2.
Well, cool. This has been really, really, really fun and educational. I've got at least 3 ideas that I need to put into my life right now. Most of them surrounding the idea of containership. But I'm sure everybody listening is probably stoked as well. Where do these guys go? What can they do to kind of take a deeper dive with you? If people, I'm sure, are feeling inspired right now.
Yeah, so you mentioned my website earlier, timeherbal.com, and thyme is like the herb, THYME. And on my website, you can learn all about my work. I have an online class that I teach in herbal medicine called The Art of Home Herbalism online, if folks are interested in that. It's a comprehensive herbal apprenticeship programs with videos and audios and reading assignments and such. It's really fun. And then I also have my books. My cookbook, Recipes from the Herbalist Kitchen, is a great way, especially if folks are into cooking and using food as a container for wellness, then that's really wonderful. And then I also have the Herbal Homestead Journal, which is a month-by-month guide through seasonal awareness, self-care, and herbal remedies. So yeah, I would say website. And then I have all the social media channels too. If folks are into social media, they can follow those through my website. So website is the best place to go, I would say.
Sweet. Yeah, that's awesome. So timeherbal.com, we're just going to kind of give them everything they need to know.
Yeah.
Awesome. This is so fun. I have a feeling that we're going to be doing more of this. Something that in the future, we're probably going to start an inner circle, sacred science inner circle type thing. And I could see our folks wanting to continue to hear from you.
Well, this has been really fun. I'm super passionate, as I'm sure you can tell, about talking about this stuff. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I think empowerment is just such a big thing for me. And I think that even just this, we didn't talk about that much, and yet we talked about so much. And the integration of these principles can be so empowering. So I hope that it feels that way for everybody. And I look forward to hearing how it unfolds for people in their lives.
Me too. I'm with you. That's like one of the really awesome side threads to all this work, is that it's people taking the power back for their own health, their own psyche, their own spiritual well-being. And I think that's just that's so needed right now, especially now more than ever. So honored to be here with you. This has been really, really fun.
Thanks for having me. And nice to meet all of you through the ether.
All right, folks, you heard it here first. Tune in next time we talk about, I'm not sure what, but I'm sure it's going to be great.